When the needle on the airspeed indicator trembles past 450 miles per hour, the air does not behave like gas anymore. It becomes solid and concrete as you are pinned to your seat, with gravity acting like an invisible hand squeezing organs through the spine. The control stick feels dead rigid and frozen, in place no matter how hard you pull. The 4-ton metal beast refuses to raise its nose. It just screams downward like a runaway meteorite hammering toward the ground, threatening to bury itself deep into the earth below. In this specific second, if you are a believer in any flight manual ever written, you are already considered a dead man walking. The textbooks tell you that at this speed, any violent control input will rip the wings clean off the fuselage, instantly destroying the plane. But Ralph Hofer had not read those damn textbooks, and in a desperate situation mere thousands of feet from impact, he did the unthinkable. He did not try to gently pull out. Instead, he violently kicked the rudder with all the strength he could muster in his legs. That single brutal motion did not just save him from the gates of hell, it inadvertently invented a dance of death, making the Luftwaffe tremble. This is the story of a lost Mustang and the boy who rewrote the rules of aerial combat, changing the history of aviation forever. September 1943, dead in a Royal Air Force Base, Essex, England. The autumn here is defined by relentless gray rain falling down. It is not the romantic rain of poetry, it is a slurry mixed with the stinging scent of high-octane aviation fuel and the raw smell of mud. It turns the world into a blur. The water does not wash the world clean, it just deepens the mire, making everything slick and treacherous. It makes the perforated steel planking of the runway as slick as grease inside the cramped cockpit of a P-51 Mustang, said Hofer. If you were to walk up to this aircraft right now, you would realize that the human sitting inside looks like a system error within the military machine. He is 22 years old, but the softness of his face makes him look barely 18 and utterly out of place. In a military culture obsessed with hierarchy and uniform inspections, Hofer is a walking disciplinary infraction to his commanders. His hair is a wild and kempt mop with a stubborn curl that always defies regulation, escaping from under his flight cap like weeds. His uniform looks like he has slept in it for a weekend. Beneath his heavy flight jacket, he refuses to take off a flashy jersey. To the rigid base commanders, Hofer is a nightmare of insubordination, but to the flight surgeons, he is a medical anomaly. His resting heart rate is shockingly low, bordering on hibernation, yet the moment he climbs into a cockpit, a fire burns at his eyes. He should not be here. In fact, he almost was not. He had been washed out of the Royal Canadian Air Force for lack of discipline. He does not fly by calculation or by instruments. He flies on animal instinct. To his instructors, he did not look like a pilot. He looked like a rodeo rider trying to break a wild horse, operating a precision machine with raw and refined aggression. And speaking of wild horses, we have to talk about the steel beast. He is strapped into the P-51 Mustang. It houses the legendary Packard Merle in V1653 engine, a liquid-cooled heart pumping out 1,600 horsepower. It features the revolutionary laminar flow wing, a mathematical masterpiece designed to slice through the air with minimal drag. But physics demands a trade-in. While God gave the Mustang speed, he buried a dark curse inside those wings. Unlike the P-47 Thunderbolt, with its thick, forgiving wings that shudder and shake to warn a pilot of an approaching stall, it is a thoroughbred. Its wings give up their lift without warning. 1 second you are carving through the clouds safely. The next, the massive torque of the engine acts like an invisible giant, flipping you over, leaving you inverted, tumbling toward the earth in a violent stall spin. For an ordinary pilot, this is a fatal flaw, but for Ralph Hofer, it was about to become the weapon that would shock the world, changing tactics forever. The day it happened was an unremarkable afternoon. Hofer was up for a routine training flight, a boring formation exercise that turned into a mock dogfight. His opponent was his squadron commander, Major Blakesley, who was the quintessential textbook tactician, every move precise, measured, and calculated. Hofer was the wild card, the unpredictable variable, and as they climbed to 25,000 feet, the air was thin and brutally cold for the fight. It was the Mustang preferred hunting ground, But inside Hofer cockpit, the heater was broken. Sub-zero wind sliced through, freezing his feet in thin boots. "All right, kid," Blakesley's voice crackled over the radio. "Show me a defensive spiral on my mark." But Hofer did not reply. He was already in the zone. At this altitude, the cold and a strange excitement sharpened his mind. He did not think. He just shoved the stick forward, initiating a violent dive. It was not a gentle nose-down input. The Mustang nose dropped like a boulder kicked off a cliff, falling faster than gravity seemed to allow. Potential energy instantly converted into kinetic energy, the engine roar shifting from a low growl to a high-pitched scream, tearing through the sky. The airspeed indicator began to spin wildly, passing 300 miles per hour, then 350, then 400, entering unknown territory. Engineers were just beginning to brush against the sound barrier. As the speed approached Mach 1, the rules of aerodynamics began to collapse completely. When the needle smashed past 450, the air stopped flowing smoothly over the wings. It began to compress, becoming hard as iron instantly. This created the phenomenon pilots of that aired most compressibility. At this extreme speed, the elevator controls became as heavy as setting concrete. No matter how strong you were, the stick felt welded to the floor. The textbook procedure was to throttle back slowly and pray control would return. But Hofer did not have time to pray. The ground was rushing up to meet him at hundreds of feet per second, impending doom. In Major Blakesley's eyes, watching from above, Hofer was already a dead man, watching the silver Mustang streak like a dart toward the English countryside, anticipating the inevitable fireball. "Pull up, Hofer, pull up." The headsets screamed with desperation. But in that lonely, freezing cockpit, Hofer was not listening. His world had narrowed to the roaring wind and great tunnel vision. In that split second, as the machine shuddered like an angry bull, Hofer made his famous decision. Since he could not pull back, since aerodynamics failed him, he used violence to counter violence. He did not cut the throttle. Instead, he firewalled it. And then, in a full-power terminal dive, he slammed the ailerons to one side while kicking the rudder pedal as hard as he could. In the opposite direction, knowing flight principles, you realize this is a cross-control maneuver at high speeds. It is suicide. You are asking the plane to yaw left while rolling right, effectively grabbing the wings and twisting them in opposite directions. The P-51 Mustang snapped. It did not turn. It broke. The left wing, shadowed by the fuselage, instantly lost all lift, while the right wing generated massive lift. The imbalance created a catastrophic, or kentering, a violent, chaotic snap roll. It was a high-speed horizontal spin, rotating 360 degrees. In a second, the centrifugal force was devastating. Hofer's vision went black instantly. This was not just G-lock, it was the blood being physically ripped from his retinas in pain. For a moment, the sky and earth inverted, the horizon spinning like a roulette, while he was falling at 500 feet per second. Out of control, a leaf caught in a hurricane. Anyone else would have passed out and died, but Hofer's blood was different. In the chaos, his hibernating heart slammed into overdrive, adrenaline flooding his system, screaming, "Recover, recover." It was not a conscious thought, it was a biological scream for survival. And then the miracle happened. Because the plane was tumbling and sliding sideways through the air, it presented its entire broadside to the wind. The air resistance was like hitting a wall. Hofer glanced at his airspeed indicator through blurred vision. 1 second ago, he was doing 450, to seconds later the needle read 250. In the span of a single heartbeat, he had bled off 200 miles per hour of velocity. It was like driving a race car at top speed and having a giant hand slam it to a halt. Major Blakesley roared past overhead, expecting to see a crater smoking in the English countryside below. Instead, he saw Hofer Mustang miraculously leveled out, hanging in the air at 15,000 feet, shaking but flying. The Major overshot. He flew right past Hofer because he had retained his energy while Hofer dumped his. In that moment, sweating his neck, screaming from the whiplash, Hofer watched his commander speed away into distance. He reached into his flight jacket, pulled out a stick of gum and shoved it into his mouth. A bloody grin spread across his face. He realized something terrible and wonderful about the plane. The Mustang's greatest weakness, its tendency to snap stall under high G load, was not a weakness if triggered on purpose. It was a super air break in three-dimensional space. If Blakesley had been German, he would be dead. Because Hofer was now sitting comfortably at his 6 o'clock, right behind him in a perfect firing position. Conventional dogfighting was an elegant dance of energy management. Keep your speed, fly smooth, arcs, lead the target. It was a gentleman duel, a refined contest of skill, but Hofer had just discovered a dirty brawler tactic. A way to throw the plane into total chaos and use that chaos to change the game instantly in his favor. He had inadvertently invented a maneuver that would baffle pilots decades later in the jet age of aviation. He did not put it in his report that night. How could he explain to his superiors what had just happened? "Sir, I almost died, but I found out if I fly like a lunatic, I win." No, he kept it to himself. Lying on his bunk, he replayed the sensation, the tearing G-force the instant stopped the image of the leader overshooting. He knew that when he faced the Nazi veterans across the channel, this secret would be his ace in the hole. The Germans flying their Me-109 and Def W-190 were used to Allied pilots flying by the book. They had no idea that a kid in a football jersey was coming for them, bringing a death dance called the Hofer Slide. That would turn their sky into hell. March 1940 for the 8th Air Force bombers target the heart of the Reich. For the first time, Berlin, at 30,000 feet, the B-17 carved white scars of contrails across the European sky. For the P-51 escorts, it is a marathon of endurance, but for Ralph Hofer, it is a hunt. True to form, Hofer has gotten lost, not because he cannot navigate, but because his hunter instinct rejects the sheep. Through a gap in the clouds, he spots a lone Messerschmitt Bf-109. The German pilots ease him too. The Luftwaffe veterans have a standard protocol for this. When a Mustang dives on you from high altitude, you brake hard. They know the Mustang stiffens up at high speed. The American will either overshoot flying right past you or rip his wings off. The German watches the silver dot expand in his mirror and smirks, confident in his superior knowledge of the enemy machine. He cuts the throttle and pulls back on the stick, waiting for the foolish American to fly by helplessly. But he is not fighting a textbook pilot, he is fighting Hofer, the wild card who plays by no rules. As the airspeed indicator screams toward that deadly 450 mark, Hofer does not slow down, he does not try a gentle pull-up. Thousands of feet above the earth, he kicks that lethal rudder pedal, initiating the maneuver that defies physics. In the German horrified eyes, the Mustang, which should have been a streak of silver lightning, suddenly convulses like a boomerang. The fuselage snaps sideways, the air resistance hits the plane like a solid wall, erasing the kinetic energy of the dive. Physics seems to glitch. The German plan evaporates. Instead of overshooting, the Mustang is now sitting ghostly still directly on his tail. It is the sight no pilot ever wants to see. For .5's Aero caliber Browning machine guns staring into his cockpit. Hofer does not even need the gyroscopic gun sight. At this range, he can see the rivets on the German helmet. He squeezes the trigger. 6 streams of fire shred the wing roots of the Messerschmitt, turning metal into confetti. The arrogance of the Luftwaffe ace dissolves into a fireball, plummeting toward the suburbs of Berlin below. This was the Hofer turn, or as the pilots began to whisper, the Hofer Slide. A braking maneuver that gambled with death, turning a loss of control into a weapon. By June 1940, for the invasion of Normandy is underway to support the Soviets, the Americans launch the shuttle raids. Hofer is in bad shape. He has malaria, his body is racked with fever, his teeth chattering. The flight surgeons ground him, warning he will pass out at altitude. He refuses. Wrapped in thick wool blankets, shivering like a dying man, he climbs into his cockpit, clutching the stick with trembling hands. He is not just sick, he is possessed. Combat is his only medicine. En route to the Poltava airbase in the Soviet Union, Hofer formation stumbles upon a scene from a nightmare slaughterhouse. Below, a massive column of Soviet trucks is being decimated. A swarm of German Ju-87s to dive bombers is circling like vultures, picking them off. Above the Stuka is a layer of B-F-1's R-09 and WWII fly top cover. Attacking a layered formation like this is suicide. You must clear the fighters before you touch the bombers, but Hofer has no patience for logic. He ignores the fighters like a falling meteor. He dives straight through the fighter screen, aiming for the Stukas on the deck. It is a massacre. The Stuka is a slow, clumsy beast compared to the Mustang. Hofer first pass disintegrates a bomber in mid-air, but he does not pull up. He uses his dive speed to slash right into the center of the German formation, causing absolute panic among them. The high-altitude German escorts finally react. 3B F-1's F-09 scream down, locking on to Hofer tail instantly. He is trapped a wall of bombers in front, 3 killers behind, and that splits second. Hofer plays his card. At treetop height, in the middle of a chaotic furball, he kicks the rudder and slams the stick. The Mustang enters its signature sickening snap roll at low altitude. This should be fatal. The ground is right there. But for the Germans chasing him, it is worse. The 3 diving 109 cannot react in time. They watch the Mustang hit an air brake and stop. They shoot past him instantly. The hunter becomes the hunted. Hofer levels the plane. His windshield is now filled with the backs of 3 panicked Messerschmitts. He does not need complex maneuvering. He just taps the trigger, unleashing hell on the fleeing enemies. One by one, they trail black smoke and smash into the earth in a rhythmic cadence of destruction. In less than 2 minutes, the sky belongs to him, clearing the airspace of any threat. He is a bull in a china shop, but every movement is precise destruction, controlled chaos. When he finally pulls up, 5 pyres are burning on the ground, 5 confirmed kills, 2 more are damaged. 7 enemies in 2 minutes. This is not a dogfight, it is an execution of the highest order. When he lands on the muddy runway at Poltava, the ground crew is shocked to find not a triumphant god of war, but a pale, sweating ghost shivering under a blanket, trapped in wool, looking fragile and completely spent from the ordeal. In that moment, Hofer ceased to be just a pilot. He became a living myth among men. A myth who, in the delirium of malaria, used a loophole in physics to butcher the Luftwaffe. But myths have endings, and warriors like Hofer do not die in hospital beds. July 2nd, 1944. Most are Yugoslavia. Another routine strafing mission for Hofer. Strafing is more dangerous than dogfighting with the enemy. Flak has no emotion. It cannot be tricked by a snap roll. Hofer spots a heavily defended area. It was a flak emplacement or an airfield. He is still fighting. The malaria weakened slow. But the instinct takes over. He pushes the nose down for the last dive of his life. His wingman watches the Mustang Salem representative scream downward. The angle is steep. The speed is blinding. Just like that training flight that scared Major Blakesley, everyone waits for the pull-up or the recovery. The ground erupts in a web of tracer fire. This time, there is no miracle to save him. Perhaps a shell hits the cockpit, taking the boy instantly, or perhaps the fever causes him to black out for just 1 critical second, or perhaps he was just too tired, simply wanting to sleep finally. In the speed he loved so much, the Mustang does not pull up. It does not roll. It impacts the earth like a silver bullet. There is no Hollywood explosion, just a dull thud and a cloud of black smoke that the wind quickly erases, leaving nothing but silence in the valley. Ralph Kid Hofer, 22 years old, forever frozen as the 18-year-old in the football jersey. After the war, Hofer's story was buried in mountains of paperwork. Historians did not like him. His tactics were non-standard, his discipline non-existent. You cannot teach flight students to lose control to win. But in the textbooks of aerodynamics, Hofer had accidentally touched the future. He had used the most primitive, brutal method to validate the theory of energy maneuverability. He proved that in a dogfight, the winner is not the one who flies the fastest, but the one who can change energy state the quickest. Even if it means nearly crashing today when we watch an F-22 or a Su-57 perform a gravity-defying Cobra maneuver. When we marvel at vector thrusting, we should look back to the rain-soaked skies of 1944. To a long-haired American kid shivering in a cold cockpit, he did not know the formulas. He did not have thrust vectoring, he just had a stubborn Mustang and a wild heart. He misjudged a dive, and in doing so he taught the world how to fly. This is the story of Ralph Hofer, the Mustang that danced on the edge of destruction. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history, deadliest miscalculations, smash that like button and subscribe. I am your strategy observer. I will see you on the next battlefield.